So this talk is inspired by a question of what affect does in migration, how feelings and atmosphere shape decisions to move, and how they continue to matter throughout migratory experience. And so I'm very happy to share some of the insights of my research of the past 5 years, mainly with Estonian migrants. So in August 2014, a prominent politician and member of parliament, then director of Estonian National Museum, announced a word called comfort refugee as part of his speech for Estonian National Independence Restoration Day. And then the weekly newspaper Eesti Express announced its word of the week, mugavuspagulane, which is in Estonian for comfort refugee. I cite, with the term, Lucas refers to people who have recently left Estonia or are planning to do so. These people are not part of the wave that left in 1944. These are comfort refugees who are leaving now, in part also slackness refugees. So the term comfort refugees quickly became a widespread social stereotype in Estonia. Their migration was framed as driven by convenience and personal gain rather than persecution, unlike the earlier major immigration wave of 1940s when Estonians fled the Soviet occupation. By the time of gathering thoughts for this presentation here, the Estonian Language Institute had added the term to its dictionary, defining it as a person who flees their homeland in search of better living conditions and higher pay. So this institutionalization further suggests that the term has become an unquestioned part of Estonian vocabulary. But its circulation of this term in reference to migrants is just a symptom of how emigration is deeply entangled in moralizing public narratives. So my talk today explores how affect operates both as a mode of governing migration and as a lived contradiction in national belonging within the landscape of east to west migration in post-enlargement Europe. And I mainly draw on my data with Estonian migrants. Sarah Ahmed has famously stated that affects stick. But what I show soon here is also how affects may also slip, and how the affects may slip beyond the most dominant frames. My ethnographic research with Estonian migrants have revealed what I called an affective contradiction in national belonging. That is, strong feelings of pride and attachment coexist with a certain senses of alienation or degrade from certain aspects of society that are associated with Soviet past, conservative nationalism, or what my research participants referred as the Eastern European mentality. So this talk is driven by two main questions. So first, how does the discourse of comfort refugees function as a form of affective governance? And how do migrants negotiate, resist, or internalize its moralizing claims? And second, how does the socio-historical context of Eastern Europe shape affective contradiction in Estonian migrants' sense of belonging? So before we continue, just a brief overview of what are the key terms of my talk. So how I understand affective governance. So these are the ways emotions are mobilized, regulated, and circulated to shape people's conduct and sense of belonging. It is how feeling becomes a tool of governing, suggesting not only how you're supposed to feel, but also what you're supposed to feel, what kind of feelings are permitted. And this kind of governing does not necessarily mean that it's governed by the state. It's more how power operates in a Foucauldian sense, how these kind of sentiments arise as a result of collective conduct, as a result of collectively created atmospheres. Affective contradiction. So this is the simultaneous presence of diverging or opposing affective affinities, attachments, and orientations within the same person or community. So that is this coexistence of feelings of pride and shame, belonging or estrangement. So in this talk, I draw mainly on my data concerning Estonian migrants who are young adults who left Estonia after Estonia had joined the European Union. So they were the first generation that experienced freedom of mobility as part of the European Union. We could say that these migrants are rather privileged in the sense that migration for them was mostly a choice, not necessity, nor forced. It was mostly driven by desire to see the world, experience different culture. Oftentimes, these movements are happening as part of some higher education frameworks. I mainly draw on oral interviews together with a colleague of mine, at Tallinn. We conducted over 50 of them. Around half were also video recorded, and I come back to it later on. I also draw on survey data, also conducted among the young Estonians who had with a recent migratory experience. All in all, we had over 2,000 respondents. And additionally, specifically for that paper, I also I made some media and discourse analysis, and also additionally, as part of the research project where majority of this data was gathered in Estonian Noored eestlased välismaal, young Estonians abroad. It was a project that lasted 3 years. We also had a participatory audiovisual research, but my today's talk does not really concern that part of the project. But before we continue, a little bit of the context of East to West migration, post-EU enlargement migration in Europe. So after 2004, when the first new EU countries joined the European Union, within the first few years, the population of the old member state grew by an estimate of 1 million. And substantial proportion of this came from across the new member state countries, including the Baltics. And this concerned mostly young adults who came of age at the time when this open Europe was first time possible. And particularly in a popular framings, these people have been framed as Generation Y, who are now in their late 20s or 30s or early 40s. So they came of age in the borderless Europe, and their migration has been described as temporal, circular, open-ended, that you go, but you don't know when you're going to return or if you're going to return. This phenomenon has been also described as liquid migration. That is, they may leave for one reason, stay for another, move to a third country, maybe return, maybe then go again. And this kind of wayfaring lifestyle has been also enforced by the rise of low-cost airlines and new communication technologies, which have diminished the importance of physical location in sustaining relationships. And as a result of these structural changes, Estonia, as well as other Eastern European countries, have experienced this kind of culture of migration, a shared set of beliefs and social patterns that have normalized mobility in early adulthood. So also among my friends, it became very popular to take a gap year to go to Australia with a work and holiday visa, or use Erasmus program to spend a semester or a year abroad, and so on. But this not only promised adventure, but also economic improvement, which was also very important against the precarious conditions at home. And me, myself, at the age of 20, I moved to London for a couple of summers. And I have to say that it made a quite substantial impact on my own financial situation in my early 20s. But furthermore, transnational experience in the West also held a symbolic value for people in the East. This generation has grown up with childhood experience from post-socialist transition period, when the state development was measured against the backdrop of idealized West. So one's personal experience in the West, your own journey to the West, is perceived as an attractive step in self-development. Going abroad is a kind of rite of passage, a ritual of transition to adulthood, an opportunity to experience the norm that the West was perceived from the Eastern European perspective. Most recent Estonian immigrants do not think of their temporary move abroad as a final departure from Estonia. Many describe their experience as living in two places at the same time, as temporary absence, or stress how they continue participating in the mental space of Estonia, enabled by online media and communication channels. Or like a friend of mine who is a father of two living in Canada, away from Estonia already 13 years, told me that I have never left Estonia, I'm just a little bit outside Estonia. However, in Estonia, public discourse on migration remains shaped by lingering anxieties, and migrants are often portrayed as morally suspect, benefiting from higher wages and better welfare systems abroad while abandoning their homeland. These framings also intersect with nationalist concerns about depopulation and demographic survival, echoing what Puumeister has called discourse of survival as the foundation of Estonian national identity. Therefore, Estonian public discourse on immigration is deeply intertwined with demographic fears, particularly low birth rates and concerns over reproduction, which are perceived as existential threats for a small nation like Estonia, just 1 million people, 1.3 million. There is also an expectation, especially among those who came of age in the 90s, to contribute to building the nation, so to speak. So this generation often views the post-Soviet transition as a formative moment of moral investment, which involves not just that you're supposed to make your family here, but you're also supposed to contribute to communities, be active citizen, pay your taxes in Estonia, be present. But many millennials, in contrast, express ambivalence towards these expectations, emphasizing personal growth, flexibility, and well-being. So here's the tension between what mobility promises in a free Europe and what it actually demands, between the desire of self-realization through movement and the sense of moral debt imposed by those left behind. So a couple of words on the theoretical anchors of this talk. I draw on concepts of affective nationalism, affective economies, and migration guilt, alongside Foucault's work on biopolitics and Estonian Puumeister's note on discourse of survival. Sara Ahmed has shown that emotions are deeply embedded in social and political context, shaping and being shaped by power dynamics. Affective nationalism enables an explanation of the affective nature of national belonging, revealing how processes of national signification shape sentiments of both attachment and alienation. Affects are furthermore forged by specific bodily histories, such as, in this case, discussed here, the experience of growing up in post-socialist Estonia and the more recent experience of migration, usually from Eastern to Western Europe. But as a person migrates, the connotations of the region of origin become activated. Being someone from post-socialist East did not matter the same way when migrating to a country where suddenly this specific region is being measured against global developmental hierarchies in which it ranks lower. Estonians abroad then acquire a different sense of their national belonging. These experiences reflect the affective contradictions which are embedded in the socio-historical construction of the East and the West, and which are activated namely through and in a migratory experience from the East to the West. But let me then unpack it. A comfort refugee. So as I already mentioned at the beginning, The term started circulating in Estonian publics when in 2014 prominent politician Tõnis Lukas mentioned it in his talk, and the media picked it up. And Estonian public broadcast was, titling their news with this comfort refugees, and then it went viral on social media. And since then, the term has appeared in books, theater plays, opinion pieces, speeches, television shows, and usually deployed with derogatory intent or with irony. The stereotype frames migrants as individuals who fail to contribute to Estonian society and are instead driven by selfish motivations. And among many of the appearances, one cultural artifact deserves particular attention, and I cite, "Fuck off, Estonian society, with your startups, muhu bread, and private people. Fine, let me be a comfort refugee then. I'll find the warmest place Ryanair flies to and buy a one-way ticket to Tenerife." So writes Triin Heinla in her 2017 travel letter published in Müürileht, a monthly newspaper, where she was documenting her moneyless travels in Canary Islands and Berlin. And the above phrasing was widely quoted and became emblematic of generational discontent. Heinla's essay blended ironic detachment with candid reflections on choosing a life of freedom abroad, and it provoked strong reactions, including moral outrage and ridicule. It seemed to touch a nerve in Estonian society by highlighting this uneasy tension between individual freedom and collective responsibility. Rather than rejecting the label of comfort refugee, she ironically embraces it. By voicing discomfort with Estonian societal expectations, hyperproductivity, emotional coldness, startup fetishism, she frames migration not as a betrayal, but as an act of self-preservation and alternative value-making, even as she vividly describes the many forms of discomfort her journey entailed. And perhaps what further startled readers was that the author was a young woman. Heinla also documented her shifting gender subjectivity as she was living in a hippie communes in Tenerife or staying at punk squats in Berlin. Yet what the article truly revealed was this deep tension between post-socialist expectations of sacrifice and loyalty, and millennial subjectivities that embrace mobility, individual freedom, and self-care as a response to burnout culture. My own research participants described their departure from Estonia not as a pursuit of ease or search for comfort, but as a deliberate and often emotionally, professionally, socially, and culturally difficult move out of the comfort zone. Rather than identifying with the comfort refugee label, interviewees explicitly reject it, framing migration as a disruption of stability, not a search for it. They speak in terms of challenge, personal growth, and transformation, positioning departure as a break from existential or professional stagnation. Citing, "If you go abroad, you have to build yourself up from zero again. And if you've been able to do that, it's a huge achievement," tells a young man in UK. And the woman who is based in Turkey describes, "It was a total stepping out of my comfort zone, being here and being with his family. It was all just a bit too different from my usual environment." A couple living with children in UK sum it up also quite nicely, citing, "What probably made the whole thing cool or exciting was exactly that. The comfort zone in Estonia is, how should I put it, so wide, or like you can just stay in it all the time. Whereas here, you're actually constantly in the discomfort zone." So such narratives invert the dominant framing entirely. Migration becomes an act of self-making through discomfort, while staying in Estonia is described as a real comfort, linguistically, socially, and emotionally. The language of leaving the comfort zone becomes a moral and emotional counter-discourse to the notion of comfort refugee. It allows migrants to reclaim agency, embrace personal growth, and reject the accusations of complacency in their choice to leave behind the expected obligations of national contribution. So next I'm going to show an extract of some of the video interviews that we recorded as part of this project. And so this is a documentary series in the making. So the sound and the picture is not polished yet, but I think it works still well as an ethnographic example.
Ma mäletan, kui oli see jutt nendest mugavuspagulastest, siis see tundus hästi naljakas, sest et mul pole nagu esimesed 10 aastat, kui ma olin nagu emigreerumise keerises, siis mul küll mugav ei olnud. Ma ei tea, kust otsast see immigrant olemine nagu mugav on. Et see on huvitav, sul on mingeid väljakutseid, sa õpid hästi palju, aga nagu mugavusest on asi väga kaugel, et võib-olla selles mõttes mul on mugav Californias, et seal on soe, aga mulle isegi ei meeldi nagu soojust nii palju. Tegelikult mul on seal ka ebamugav, mul on seal liiga palav.
Või mina olen küll tundnud, ütleme, et süüdi või halvasti selles suhtes üks asi on see perega, mis meil oli, et me tegime perele nii ja nii.
Teised inimesed.
Ja ka sõprade poolt, mõne sõbra poolt ma ikka tundsin seda küll. Et siuke reetur või siuke, no mida, mis asja, no oli küll. Ei olnud, kui sa tegelikult mõtled selle peale, kui me teist korda tagasi tulime, siis kui vähe meile tegelikult, kui vähe meile sooviti good luck. Ma arvan, et kui see mugavuspagulase fraas nagu välja öeldi, välja toodi, siis selle sõna mõte oligi see panna ebamugavalt tundma neid inimesi, kes on välismaale ära läinud. No jah, me ei ole vaata Eestis olnud, ma ei tea, kas seda kasutatakse, kas sellest räägitakse. Vähemalt ma ei tunne.
Ei, ma arvan, et see oleneb ringkonnast ka, kuhu sa satud ja kus sa käid. Ma olen kindel, et on inimesi, kes siiamaani nagu meid peaksid nagu reeturiteks. Jah, täiesti kindel.
So as was evident also in the testimonies of this couple, although it is not universal, many Estonian migrants still grapple with these deep feelings of guilt, internalized moral judgment, and the fear of being perceived as traitors to the nation. These feelings are rarely imposed directly by others, but are rather formed through internal reflection shaped by societal expectations, media discourse, and a sense of some kind of moral debt to family, to the state, or one's education in Estonia. But there's also a gendered form of guilt. And so I'm citing here. So I'm citing this. Maybe I felt a bit guilty myself. My family doesn't make me feel guilty directly, but when they asked when I'm coming back, I feel a bit guilty. I think it also has to do with how we've been raised by the media. For example, that you feel because there are so few of us in Estonia, and maybe because you're a woman, that you have some kind of obligation. So this citation illustrates how affective governance operates through reproductive expectation, moralizing women's choices in terms of national survival, echoing the call by the conservative populist politician Martti Helme, who infamously said that a 27-year-old childless woman is a socially harmful element. Sarah Ahmed talks about these tendencies in terms of affective economies, how emotions move between people and ideas, how they stick to certain bodies and circulate through public discourse. In this sense, guilt or pride about migration doesn't just live inside individuals. It's something that's constantly being produced and exchanged. And this connects to what Milits and Schur call affective nationalism, the way nations are held together not only through institutions, but through shared feelings that make belonging felt. And as Loretta Baldassar shows in her work on migration guilt, these emotions can become powerful moral technologies where migrants start to discipline themselves emotionally, even when no one explicitly blames them. These kinds of moral expectations also play a role in affective contradictions that migrants often experience abroad in relation to their country of origin. And this is the idea we have explored in depth in the article that was published last year together with my colleagues in a Journal of Baltic Studies. So in that paper, we show how Estonians abroad express both affection and estrangement, love of homeland, heartfelt feelings about song festivals in Estonia, Estonian nature, sauna or black bread, missing the family and friends or Estonian theater or language. Yet there's also discomfort with certain features in Estonian society. And quite often this was framed by my research participants as something like East European mentality. So I'm going to show you another extract of a documentary that was already, that documentary came out a couple of years ago, but I think this extract illustrates this point quite nicely.
Mul oli tore kuuajane puhkus Eestis, kus me näiteks mängisime Pirital vendasõpradega võrkpalli. Aga siis tuli keegi jälle ja kommenteeris või küsis, et oota, mis neil Eesti meestel viga on, et miks sa seal saad, mida meil siin ei ole või mida meil ei ole sulle pakkuda, et seal jälle paremat on. Mul oli pidevalt selline tunne, et mind süüdistatakse välismaal elamise või Berliinis elamise puhul sellega, et kuidagi Eestil on midagi puudu ja mina pean seda nüüd selle peale sõrmega näitama, mis on eestlastel või Eesti meestel või Eestil iseenesest puudu. Ja kui eestlaseks olemine tähendab seda, et või teda piiritletakse sellega, millised partnerid mul on ja mis rahvusest nad on, mis nahavärviga nad on, siis see ei ole see Eesti, kus ma tegelikult tahan hetkel elada või millist tulevikku modelli ma Eestile sooviksin. Ja see on suhteliselt solvav ja teeb haiget, kui mind kui indiviidi siis pannakse ühte kategooriasse ainult sellepärast, et mina olen kellegi territooriumi piiridest nagu ideelises mõttes või põhimõtete mõttes välja astunud, et ma ei sobi sellesse tema sahtlisse, kuidas peab üks Eesti naine käituma, ükskõik kas Eestis või välismaal.
For many Estonians outside Estonia, Eastern Europe does not necessarily only indicate a geographical location nor a political category. It is associated with a particular mentality and particular expectations on behavior. This mindset is understood to derive from the influence of Soviet era. It's described with references to bitterness, envy, or resentment. And examples are drawn on day-to-day experiences of unpleasant moments in different realms of society, in the public transport, service culture, also how the political elite behaves themselves. It's also associated with chauvinism, xenophobia, or general narrow-mindedness. And an example of this also comes on a story of Kaisa. So Kaisa was a 29-year-old woman living in Denmark when I interviewed her. And because Kaisa is a pseudonym. And she left Estonia after high school, moved to France, became an au pair there. And during a spontaneous travel, she ended up in Copenhagen, where she immediately felt that this was her society. Later, she moved to Denmark for university. After graduating, she decided to stay. And I counted together that during the interview, she mentioned 6 times how much she loves Estonia. She described her tender feelings with the occasional drop of tears when she thinks about Estonian culture, language, or song festivals. But at the moment she described her self-identity, she got puzzled by what she called an East European thing. So citing her. If someone asks where you come from, I'm an Estonian, right? I don't feel bad about it. There's nothing bad because I also love Estonia. But simply this East European thing. So I asked, what do you mean by this East European thing? I think it's a kind of, well, I feel it's this culturelessness in some sense, or this chauvinism, and I don't know, this strange mentality, and this Slavic something, and she laughs, theme. But I'm telling you, this is not the case in Estonia at all. It's this strange mentality maybe, but it's my own. I created this myself entirely. But I say that I am an Estonian and I am proud. And yes, Estonian. I am Estonian. So as evident here, she tries to find words to describe this complex set of feelings that she associates with being an Estonian, as someone from a place she loves, but that she also associates with this East European thing. And when mentioning this mentality in dismissive terms, she seems to need to stress how much she loves Estonia or describe these feelings as her own thing, as something she needs to work out herself. And the next video also exemplifies or reveals how there is this kind of Eastern European complex, so to speak.
Miskipärast siin ma väldin seda Venemaa ütlemist, ma pigem ütlen, et Soome ja Rootsi on meie naabrid ja me oleme nagu rohkem seal Skandinaavias kui kuskil Ida-Euroopas.
Kui me esimest korda elasime siin, siis ma säädsin ka nii. Nüüd ma olen ikka hakkan Venemaa juures tulema.
Okei, lihtsam või?
Ma olen mõelnud, et see on äkki, kuidas ma ütlen, et niimoodi ma saan üle sellest oma Ida-Euroopa kompleksist, jah, et mis siis on, et ma Venemaa kõrval enam. Mis siis on?
So what we saw in this video clip, this kind of hesitation about disclosing the East European origin, or at least admitting the experience of this East European complex, really echoes what also comes through in the survey data. So we asked the survey respondents to state which kind of categories do they belong to and which categories they feel important that they belong to. And it came out that the importance on the East European belonging is much smaller compared to other categories. Estonian belonging to Estonian group is, of course, very, very important, the most important. Over 80% of the respondents mentioned it. But also Western European, the importance on the West European belonging is also placed higher importance compared to East European belonging. And this echoes to what I call affective contradiction, this coexistence of attachment and discomfort, or pride and shame within the same self. People can feel deeply connected to Estonia, yet uneasy about certain features in Estonian society or the ways it's positioned within Europe. And these contradictions aren't just individual, they mirror larger symbolic value hierarchies in Europe, where East still carries connotations of backwardness or inferiority, even long after European Union enlargement. So when migrants negotiate these feelings, they're also navigating the emotional legacies of Europe's internal geopolitics. In that sense, these affective contradictions reveal how inequality within Europe is not only structural or economic, but is also deeply felt in the subtle gestures, affiliations, and words people use to position themselves. But my ethnography has given some great insights into alternative affective and civic belongings beyond territorial or reproductive expectations. Namely, migrants craft new forms of care and contribution, acting as cultural translators, maintaining transnational connections, and as such, they also redefine what loyalty means to them. And I'm going to show the last video extract of my interviews that exemplifies this.
Ma tunnen, et inimesed Eestis arvavad, et need, kes lähevad välismaale tööle, et nad reedavad oma kodumaa, nad ei panusta ja lähevad parema elu peale. Aga ma olen siin Norras, ma annan oma panuse. Meil on tänu sellele 40 töökohta Eestis, kes otseselt saavad sellest kasu, et mina siin olen. Ja loon kontakti koha peal. ülikooli lõpus mul oli väikene süütunne, et riik harib mind ja minul on siis eesmärk välismaale minna. 10 aastat hiljem ma olen selle ka endal nagu rahu tekitanud. Oleme üles ehitanud ettevõtte, kes loob väärtust Eestile ja ma tunnen, et see teema on minu jaoks maas. Et pigem oli see hea, et Eesti riik mulle hariduse andis, sest nüüd ta saab selle mitmekordselt tagasi.
So while Siim's contribution is economic and as such it is measurable, 40 people are employed in Estonia through his company in Norway. For others, their contributions are more indirect. Migrants describe themselves as self-made ambassadors, cultural translators, or soft power agents whose global presence promotes Estonia abroad. Some citations. I act like an Estonian ambassador. Most people I meet have never encountered an Estonian before, a person in the United States. Another one from Switzerland. Even just by educating people about Estonia, I contribute. I always promote Estonia as the most digitally advanced country. Another one from France. Maybe someday I'll have scientific funding and bring it to Estonia. That would be my contribution. So these narratives suggest that migrants are not disengaged as the comfort refugee stereotype implies. Being embedded in moral economies where contribution is fluid and negotiated, their sense of national belonging is not expressed through patriotic performance, but through indirect, affective, relational, and future-orientated contributions, which at least help them compensate the moral debt they associate their migration with. While they may feel simultaneously attached to and alienated from the national project, they nevertheless act as agents of affective diplomacy, contributing to the idea of Estonia in often uncelebrated but meaningful ways. So, conclusions. So I have argued that the discourse of comfort refugee operates as a technology of affective governance that shapes the emotional and moral landscape of migration. From one hand, this affective governance generates feelings of guilt and discomfort among migrants. On the other hand, it contributes to moral governance that makes migrants feel obliged to make indirect or future-oriented contributions to Estonia. At the heart of the discourse about comfort refugee lies a central paradox. The very freedoms that define the European project, especially the freedom of movement, have triggered a moral panic in the Estonian national imaginary. Even as mobility is celebrated as a form of transnational opportunity or personal development, it is simultaneously rendered morally suspect. Migration is not only perceived as demographic or economic concern, it is cast as a moral rupture, a failure to contribute, to remain royal in the face of hardship, or in the case of women, to literally reproduce the nation. What emerges from my ethnographic material is a stark dissonance between lived experiences and the stereotype of comfort refugee. While comfort refugee portrays migrants as passive beneficiaries of Western comfort, my interlocutors describe migration in terms of effort and self-transformation through discomfort. They don't understand it as a flight from responsibility, but as a form of ethical self-making. And yet, the moralizing gaze leaves its emotional imprints. Even when rejecting the stereotype, many of my interlocutors still expressed feelings of guilt for leaving behind family, for having benefited from Estonian welfare society or education system, or failing to live up to some abstract ideals of duty and contribution. For women, this guilt is often intensified by reproductive expectations, revealing how national discourses of demographic survival are deeply gendered. Migration guilt, then, is not merely a personal feeling. It is a product of affective governance, of public narratives that cast certain life trajectories as morally deviant, particularly against the backdrop of population decline. So this is how affective governance regulates mobility through feelings of moral depth. And for a small society such as Estonia, this becomes especially potent. What I've shown is that affects don't just stick. Sometimes they also slip. They hold us in place, but they also can make us move and to distance. How belonging is constantly negotiated within the East-West hierarchies of post-socialist Europe has created an affective contradiction in the sense of national belonging of migrants. And in both cases, these emotional dynamics are produced through the same mechanism of affective governance. And if this affective governance, instead of contributing to guilt-tripping, creates a growing sense of estrangement from Estonia, it also influences the migrants' desire to return. Yet, migrants are not merely subjects of these moralizing discourses. They actively negotiate and rework them. As I have shown, many seek to give back to Estonia in symbolic, economic, or civic ways by acting as informal ambassadors, investing in businesses, or imagining a return with skills and funding acquired abroad. These gestures reflect an ethics of contribution that exceeds territorial borders. So the moral economies they inhabit are fluid and relational, often at odds with nationalist ideals of sacrifice and physical presence. But they nonetheless point to enduring attachment to Estonia, even from afar. So I invite, therefore, to rethink mobility beyond binary frames of choice versus necessity, of loyalty versus betrayal. Migration must be understood as embedded in complex moral economies shaped by historically specific narratives, gendered expectations, class hierarchies, and public discourses that mobilize, shape, and guilt. My ethnography rather gestures towards alternative forms of affective and civic belonging that become possible when care and contributions are no longer defined through narrow, territorially bound terms. Because ultimately, what is at stake is not just how we theorize migration, but how we understand what it means to live ethically in motion against competing claims of duty, care, and aspiration. So I stop here and I welcome all your comments and thoughts and questions. Thanks.